Hi, this is Paul coming to you election night in Sacramento, Livingstone's world headquarters, where we are desperately following all the main events that really happen. No, not really. To the degree that I will follow it, I will either follow it with my family or I will follow it with our corner peeps. And so we have here Seabax and Matthew, and they are going to be, I don't know what they're going to be doing with this thing. But I think it'll be fun to watch them do it with this thing. I probably won't participate because I will be probably watching it with my family or watching something else in order to not watch. But I don't want to bury the lead. I had a conversation today with Esther Meek. I was always putting an S at the end of it because there's a woman in my church that has an S at the end of hers. So she corrected me early on. But it was really cool to talk with her. So she is a known entity in the corner. And so here's one of her books. There were a lot of things in this conversation that I think are going to stick with me for a little while. She dropped a lot of really cool things in the talk. All knowing is knowing with. I don't know. Hang on. I don't know how much Ian McGilchrist she's read or how thorough she is with him. I think once she finds him, she's going to have another whole branch growing out of her work. At the Estuary Retreat in Connecticut, one of the people who doesn't show her face on videos at all came with Ian McGilchrist's The Matter with Things. And when I first saw it, I thought it was her Bible because it was all full of these little paper tabs. And then when I talked to her, she pulled it out. She said, one of the early things she said to me is that when you really dive into McGilchrist, that's where you're all going next. And the more she talked at the conference, the more I thought she was right. I have not yet bought those huge tomes of McGilchrist's. I am currently renegotiating my relationship with books. My relationship with books comes in three forms. It comes in Logos, it comes in paper, and it comes in Kindle. And I have a scanner behind me here that I am continuing to get better at scanning. So not very well. I probably have to rescan it. This is my third attempt to scan this book, to turn this book into a PDF. Why into a PDF? Because once it's in a PDF, I can do other things with it, like I can feed it to an LLM. And once it's in an LLM, I can have some other fun with it. So that's part of the reason I'm working with some of these things. Anyway, she basically, I'll put for those of you who haven't, she's talked to Vervaeke, she's been in the corner a little bit. I believe she talked to Karen Wong. Where Vervaeke has the meaning crisis, she has a knowing crisis. And basically her knowing crisis lays to rest the modernist way of knowing and the reduction that we talk about a lot in this little corner when I talk about the recession of modernity. Now, she wasn't terribly familiar with my material. How could she be? I don't blame her. But this gets into the questions of, well, okay, what are we playing around here? What are we doing? What are we trying to get at? I'm going to drop some clips in this video. And the first one I'm going to drop is a little conversation between Neil Daedalus and McMo, where Neil talks about when he starts paying attention to things. So I'll drop that here. Actually, I think I'll first drop Esther Meek's naming of Polanyi's, I gotta find it again. Michael Polanyi's concept of unspecified sense of indeterminate future prospects. She mentioned that and she said this is tied to reality. It's tied to his broader ideas of knowledge, exploration, and discovery. Polanyi believes that much of our understanding and pursuit of knowledge relies on a tacit and intuitive grasp of what is possible, even if we can't define it or fully or predict specific outcomes. In this view, we embark on a scientific inquiry and creative exploration. We often operate with a sense that there are further insights to discover, even though we can't yet specify what they are or exactly how to find them. This is unspecified sense guides us, suggesting potential and possibility without providing precise details. It's a form of knowledge that is indeterminate because we don't yet know where it will lead or what precisely we will discover. For Polanyi, this anticipation of the unknown but meaningful future is essential to innovation and progress. It fuels curiosity and persistence in the face of uncertainty. And this is exactly what Jordan Peterson talks about when he talks about the scientific process and revelation. When somebody has a hypothesis, and then they go about the hard work to try to verify the hypothesis. But it's that leap into the hypothesis that Esther sort of gets at in terms of reality. Shoot, I'm just gonna find it here. I'm gonna play it here.
I'm not sure. I mean, so much of my story I've written in the last 20 years, So, I've had and I keep having realizations that are kind of retroactive.
Yeah, the past is a very funny thing. It's not quite as set as people imagine.
It's not even past, as somebody said, Faulkner or somebody like that. But in writing Doorway to Artistry last year, the last couple of years, I realized that I had been styling myself as a baby skeptic. But what I was an adolescent onset skeptic, which freed me up to write now about I'm calling us to return to a metaphysics of childhood. That's one of I love inventing terminology. But a key moment for me came in finding the work of Michael Polanyi.
Yeah.
And as I read his work, I said, this is making sense of my faith. And not only my faith, it's making sense of everything. Because it's like it's a big trump card. It's like this, you can't help it. This is how you go about knowing. And he was writing as a premier scientific discoverer. And I was the one who was a skeptic. And so in particular, the thing that just I still get chills as I think of it was his frequent aside that says, oh, by the way, here's how you know you've made contact with reality, which is what I was longing for. And what he said is, you've made contact with reality when you have this unspecifiable sense of indeterminate future prospects. Well, who even talks like that? There is no in the world that even raises the question. Well, there's one now. I'm a fangirl of DC Schindler, but who talks about contact with reality. But to talk about indeterminate future prospects, actually, Rowan Williams does this too in his book Faith and Art, which I've tapped deeply in the artistry book. But that sense of possibilities, and you may have realized already, or if not, as you get to know me, you'll be sure of this. I'm a very excitable person.
That's good.
And I managed to write a dissertation in writing on contact with.
And now if she writes a book called Loving to Know, she should be excitable because a lot of this is about care. Now I'm going to drop Neil's little clip.
What I'm saying is that what changes people's hearts, I think what changes people's hearts is they have a frame and they believe something about a frame, and there's something still within them that allows them to break that frame and say, like, no, for in this one case, I'm going to take a step out, even though there is no ledge there. There's no ledge because I know my frame, and the frame says that the ledge ends here. And for whatever reason, this little voice is like, no, I'm gonna take a step out beyond that ledge. And maybe it's like in my case, it was desperation. Like, it's like I've got no better option. Like, I'm gonna take a step out on the ledge that doesn't exist. because I know it doesn't exist, and I know that because I have a certain frame. And then suddenly, like, you take that step, and then, wow, actually there is a ledge there. And then it's actually a step. And then there's another step, every step you take. And then you begin to trust, let's say, an aspect of your experience that wasn't there before. And then somehow the steps keep coming. So I always look for these moments where I know someone has had one way of thinking about things previously. And then I look for that actual change in their frame. Like I look for a clue that, oh, the person that I knew 3 months ago or 6 months ago, they wouldn't have actually just done what they did or said what they said or da-da-da-da-da. And it's very rare when that sort of like, it's like, ooh, they just did something unexpected, but in a really good way. Yeah, sometimes it's unexpected in a bad way. That sucks when that happens. But yeah.
Yeah, that's bringing up a lot.
And now I'm going to drop Jordan Peterson's clip.
Okay, so you can think about Christ from a psychological perspective, and the critic, my critic, this particular critic that I've been reading, said, well, that doesn't differentiate Christ much from a whole sequence of dying and resurrecting mythological gods. And of course, people have made that claim in comparative religion. Joseph Campbell did that, and Jung to a lesser degree, I would say, but Campbell did that. But the difference, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out as well, the difference between those mythological gods and Christ was that there's a representation of, there's a historical representation of his existence as well. Now you can debate whether or not that's genuine. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter in some sense because this, well, it does, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. You know, that's Jungian synchronicity. Yeah. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. You know, we have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to... that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. It's partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it.
If you believed in the story of Christ, or if you believed that history and let's say the narrative meet, let's
both,
say.
I think you, because when you believe that, you buy both those stories. You believe that the narrative and the objective can actually touch.
Because all of this has provoked a lot of thought in me about a lot of things. One of the things, so we did a lot of talking. Esther and I did a lot of talking about education, because we both agree that we are in a culture with a certain kind of knowledge, certain kinds of assumptions of what we mean by knowledge, that it's caused us trouble. It's given us some things. And again, I think McGilchrist is really onto a lot of this. And some of the ways that I tried to press her on a symptomology of the knowing crisis. And then there's another little clip I made about eschatology, about the knowing crisis. Well, and I think actually maybe I'll play that now too. Well, part of, I think, a corollary to your mission is an item which should say almost everything that we think we know things aren't really exactly that. They keep going deeper. So
Mhm.
Karen Wong at the event that we did in Olympia, Washington, she was talking to someone, and Karen is a great example of this because she doesn't have a theology degree. She was active in politics for a while, but anybody who listens to her channel knows she is getting into some really deep stuff. And she talked to someone, I really have to memorize exactly how this went, but she talked to someone who said, you don't really know the world until you bump into something in the world that you begin to realize it has no bottom.
Mm. Like a
And like one person they bumped into, it was hair. And and you think hair, I got hair. There's no bottom to knowing hair. And another person was paint. You think paint? And
yeah,
you realize there's no bottom to
yeah.
knowing paint. And what this actually, and again, I'll invoke a little bit of, my formal training. What this does actually is sort of open a door that Augustine opened, which said that actually it is all about the order of our loves, because God made this world so rich
Hmm.
that if you love paint, if you keep going drilling down into paint, you will
Yeah.
find God. And it's like,
Oh, uh-huh.
and that's exactly what creation is about.
Let me commend Doorway to Artistry, where I finally feel like I've done a responsible job in figuring out how I know. So now I can finally start to love reality. So now I call myself an exuberant realist. But so in Doorway to Artistry is attuning your philosophy to enhance your creativity, and so that has to do with our views of reality and our views of how we know. And so this is my first time to do metaphysics, which is what I'm calling a metaphysics of childhood, but it's just classical Christian metaphysics, and I feel like it's the doctrine of creation. So I talk about the ising of things.
Hmm.
So in other words, things showing up. The most remarkable thing about you is that you're here,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's utterly astounding. Well, that just is the Lord's let there being. It's his ising. And there's nothing underneath. It's just ising. And so
There's nothing
essay,
and everything underneath.
honest rendered essay or existence, the heart of metaphysics, literally the main act. So I'm saying it's like a fountain. It's this fountain of lively ising where reality shows up and says, here I am. Here I am. And it's like I can't get over Genesis 1:1, right? That's just the most astounding thing. And so the first study chapter is about essay, and then in the study the next day, where I talk about this, my Aunt Lorraine's pedestal dish, China pedestal dish, um, I talk about everyday jewels of the real. So things, the primacy of things, I capitalize things with a T, and this is subversive of the reductivism of reality, right? So things, ordinary things, are everyday jewels of the real, and the glinting facets are, oh, guess what? The transcendentals.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
You know,
Yep.
beauty, goodness, and truth, but also thing is the first transcendental, and then something, right? And then relatedness, and then all those kinds of things. So I'm doing plain old, like I finally got a chance to study a little bit of classical Christian metaphysics after all my years in analytic philosophy, you know. And I'm just saying, look, this is astounding, and it just is the doctrine of creation. So Michael Hanby says that the primacy of things is distinctively at home only in a classical Christian vision.
Hmm. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And part of what for me was super helpful in in getting me on the road to this was actually eschatology and the vision of the new heavens and the new earth and the resurrection.
Yeah.
Because Jesus, all right. Again, it's all in the video. Just no ads if you want to see it. Now it'll come out in a few days. But one of the things that, well, I've taken a page from Jeff P. keeping Robot Lady on a right here on the screens. Except I don't have her talking to me. I just have her texting me. The phrase, the glory of God as a man fully alive, is attributed to St. Irenaeus, an early Christian theologian, Bishop of Lyon, in his work Adversus against heresies. Irenaeus emphasizes that living fully is a way of manifesting God's glory. He suggests that humans reach their fullest potential and deepest purpose when they live in alignment with God, experiencing the fullness of life that comes from divine connection. The phrase is often paraphrased or interpreted as a Christian is a man fully alive, capturing the idea that true vitality and fulfillment are found in a life in Christ. For Irenaeus, spiritual life, physical life, and the experience of God's grace all contribute to the sense of being fully alive, in contrast to a life that is merely biological or detached from the divine. Now, that's through ChatGPT, so take it. You have to add a little bit of caution with something like that. Part of what we talked about is education and what our current modes of education are doing, what our current assumptions of knowing are doing. And again, I didn't think we got anywhere in terms of, let's say, the symptomology of the knowing crisis. But the symptomology of the knowing crisis probably isn't too far away from the symptomology of the meaning crisis. And while John and After Socrates treated that a little bit in the video that I've played a bit, the symptomology of the meaning crisis early on with really bad sound with John Vervaeke and Christopher Mastropietro, I thought was an excellent video. I think it was a 2-part video. Part of the reason I played the Jordan Peterson narrative world touching video is the question, what does it look like when we find a man fully alive? Now, if you're a Christian, obviously part of what you're going to point to is Jesus. Now, Jesus, of course, brings up an interesting challenge. Was Jesus a desert father living in a hovel? No. Was Jesus a .com billionaire sending rockets to Mars? No. How to describe Jesus? And of course, you don't want to be too unimaginative or restrictive in terms of pegging this to Jesus, because Jesus also had a mission and a calling that gave shape to his life in a particular and peculiar way. But Peterson's moment there, where he's wrestling with the question of the physicality of the resurrection, and again, we just saw him do another round with Richard Dawkins, where he's trying to wrestle with these things. The instantiation of someone fully alive is going to be deeply contextual. Now, a big piece of this is that this dispensation, this world, can only hold so much. I've made that point in previous videos. I also have my argument for the identification of God as that which satisfies completely and utterly, eternally. Because nothing else can do that. Now, all the other satisfactions, some of you will hear undertones of John Piper's, I should scan that book too, Desiring God. Okay, Robot Lady, the thesis of John Piper's Desiring God, Meditations of a Christian Hedonist, is that true Christian living is marked by the pursuit of deep joy in God, which Piper calls Christian hedonism. He argues that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him, meaning that seeking joy and satisfaction in God is not only permissible but essential in glorifying him. Piper contends that God created humans to find their ultimate happiness in him, and this joy in God fuels a life of worship, obedience, and love. Rather than viewing self-denial as the pinnacle of Christian life, Piper teaches that Christians should desire God passionately as the source of ultimate satisfaction. He believes this pursuit of joy leads to a more vibrant and authentic faith, transforming all aspects of life, including worship, relationships, and acts of service. In essence, desiring God encourages believers to see the pursuit of happiness as inseparable from the pursuit of God, challenging the idea that pleasure and piety are at odds. Again, most of the sufferings are, most of these summaries are pretty good. Of course, they are harvested from a lot of other web pages, whereby these are, of course, people who have generated these summaries, and ChatGPT is pulling them together, and of course using their little own special kind of mathematical word salad to do it. So this is James Scott's book on Mother Teresa. ChatGPT didn't give me what I wanted to from that book summary, so sorry, I've got to do it myself. One of the things that James Scott, when he was reading her writings and diaries and biographies of her when he was putting this book together, wrestled with is the fact that internally it didn't seem like a lot of joy. Now someone could say, well, but those acts of service were so full of emptying herself that of course it wasn't. But no, often we have the image that it's this internal fount of joy that flows out into acts of service, that sort of misery, deliverance, gratitude. In her case, she bore an extra burden of believing God had abandoned her, and yet she did all of that which she did. Whenever I start a video, some of the alternative ideas for what the video is going to be tonight will not be denied, and so I must put them together. We long to have God show up in our lives, and if we have this intuitive definition of God as that which completely satisfies, that which completely rescues, that which redeems, that which restores, that which gives, that which provides, all of those things, then, well, why have people wandered away from church and walked away? And again, in the first part of this video, Nathan does a great job of saying it's not because of new atheism. That's a sideshow over there. It's not because people somehow can't believe in the supernatural anymore. It's so amazing how often you can't believe in the supernatural anymore. It's like you can't, telling someone you can't pick your nose. Watch them. They're going to do it. You can't say this, or this. Watch them. They're going to do it. Just, utter foolishness. That's how some people have no idea what human beings are. Anyway, shut up. Jump into this.
For ghost hunter shows, as some of them might put it, right? They really are into it, right? They think it's fascinating. And so I think these two things are pretty clearly related. On the one hand, the disillusionment with religion and the wandering away from religion is at least partly prompted by the fact that they want God to show up, to speak, to intervene, to help, and he didn't, right? And so they wonder if he's even there. And on the other hand, with the paranormal, what the paranormal offers is a palpable encounter with something that doesn't convince them that there are things on the other side up here, but rather they have an encounter, right? And it hits them right here. On an existential level, they're convinced.
So listen to Justin Brierley. It's Justin Brierley that always goes into this. Listen to Justin Brierley recently with Alex O'Connor. He would have to hear something. He sort of invited God to show up and do all those things, and God didn't show, so therefore he's a no-show. Justin Brierley and Douglas Murray and Bethel McGrew. I don't know if she was still Esther O'Reilly at that point, but I'd have to hear a voice. Or was that with Jordan Peterson and Peugeot? I don't know. But exactly the same as what Jacobs describes here.
That's real, right? Ghosts are real. It's an experience. It's an encounter. It's something that's palpable. And that's the thing they hungered for from God and didn't get. But at least a ghost will offer it. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why exploration of the occult and the paranormal is actually rather common, amongst those who abandon religion, because they're still on an existential level looking for that encounter with something that's on the other side, something that tells them our world actually is haunted or enchanted or something like that. Now, this actually raises yet another tension within the nuns. So let's take a look at one more clip on spirituality to draw this out. Take a look.
Do you think a person has to be religious in order to have certain religious beliefs, say belief in God or the afterlife?
I would say you could be a nun and have some religious beliefs.
I do consider myself spiritual. One of the few strong beliefs I have is in universal interconnection. Everything in the universe is interdependent on each other. I
don't know if I want to use this because I don't know what Amazon's going to do with respect to it.
Inherently spiritual about our connection to one another, about the doing of good or the committing of evil, and the sort of cosmic dance that plays out as a result of that. But what you also find with many of them is that they believe that nature itself is spiritual, right? And this is almost more of an aesthetic intuition, right? The idea that somehow the encounter of beauty and sublimity in the world stirs up some sort of feeling that they identify as inherently spiritual. And so the spiritual sense that it excites in them, they associate with the world itself in its beauty, in its sublimity. Nature, for example, is inherently spiritual. And as I mentioned, they also believe that our world is haunted. And so it's also filled with spirits. So these are many of the convictions that they have regarding spirituality, right? Themselves, nature, our connection to one another, ghost spirits, things like that. Now, the tension, I had mentioned that there's a tension here. Well, the tension is that, as I said, God is too hidden to be believed in. And yet, our world is obviously spiritual. So how did the nuns resolve this tension? Well, the answer is very much the same way they resolved the tension with regard to meaning, right? So you remember that I'd said that many of the nuns could not accept the idea that God lets things happen for a reason, but they could accept via karma that things happen for a reason. And the reason is because the feature of the Christian view that was unacceptable was the fact that God is a person, right? That he is watching, that he's making choices, that he could intervene and he doesn't, and things like that. And
of course, this triggers the whole conversation that I've had for a long time. Go to Christine Hayes' treatment of Ezekiel Kaufman in her Yale University lectures about the meta-divine realm. In other words, these people have just simply become pagans, and the idea of the God of the Bible, over which there is no meta-divine realm, that's sort of what they check out of.
And it's the removal of the personal that suddenly made karma, fate, meaning, justice, cosmic order acceptable. Well, so in the same way, you see the same thing happen with the nuns and spirituality. They have certain spiritual experiences or feelings that, certain feelings, experiences that they identify as spiritual. They tie many of those with nature, so they identify nature as somehow spiritual. They have encounters that they would identify as paranormal, and those excite feelings that they would call spiritual. And all of this is connected with just a dimension of the cosmos. It's connected with karma and fate, a higher power in the abstract sense, but nothing personal. And so their sense of spirituality is not a spirituality that has to do with a God who is personal, who is observing things, who orders the world and makes choices or might connect with them. Rather, it has to do with a statement about a feature of the world. The world itself has spiritual dimensions to it. I have spiritual dimensions to it. Nature, I have spiritual dimensions to me. Nature has spiritual dimensions to it. The paranormal is obviously spiritual. And ultimately, when we talk about spirituality, we're just talking about a feature or a property of life itself. We're not talking about a big cosmic drama orchestrated by a personal being that one might call God. So Now, to this point, we've talked about positive beliefs, right? We've talked about the conviction that the world is meaningful. We've talked about the belief, what they mean by things like karma or fate. We've talked about the fact that they believe that they are spiritual beings in a spiritual world, their belief in the paranormal, and so on. But let's talk about doubt, because one of the things amongst the nuns that is rather consistent is that most of them are very unsure about what happens after you die. So let's take a look.
So I'll pause that because, again, I don't want any difficulty with Amazon. Might have to clip that out of the video. At the same time, even though people are looking for experience, he also recently had a nice thing on experience with the paranormal and demons. He's doing some little clips. One of my go-to pieces is Andy Crouch's A Testimony in Reverse. Once upon a time, I wanted to hear the voice of God. The charismatic Christian community that introduced me to Jesus expected him to speak vividly and verbally. Today, while my prayer life generally consisted of squinting my eyes and listening for some echo of divine voice between my own thoughts, I can testify that they were right. A bare handful of times in my life, I heard words that came speech-like unbidden into my mind. Unfortunately, some of the times God's voice has been clearest have been times I disobeyed. During my senior year of college, I was precariously in love. After a few intense months of courtship, my beloved moved to Boston, and I was desperate to follow her. Good Christian that I was, I decided to pray for guidance. I sat on my bed with my eyes closed. Makes me think of Jordan Peterson and Sam Harrison, that thing. Sat on his bed with his eyes closed. Shut tight. 2 words formed insistently in my brain. Don't go. What was this? Clearly, I thought, fears of romantic commitment were welling up in my subconscious. And why would God say, don't go, without where to go? I decided to pray more intently. Lord, I really want you to lead me. Interrupting my prayers, I heard 2 and only 2 words. Don't go. The voice, entirely clear, though not physically audible, was neither harsh nor yielding. I stopped praying. Since the truth was I had already made up my mind, I moved to Boston. A few weeks later, I walked out of my beloved's apartment in a driving snowstorm. Wisely, she had ended our relationship. I love that story. I absolutely love that story because it makes such a point that what are we looking for? An end to the meaning crisis, an end to the knowing crisis. A person fully alive. The shape of the most fully alive person in human history is the shape of a first century tradesman who, for most of the first 30 years, seemed relatively obscure and then burst on the scene saying the kinds of things that not only would get him canceled but killed. He wrote no book. His followers preached about him, and either follower of followers wrote books. Of course, Paul of Tarsus had a road to Damascus moment that his followers, or at least a good enough number of them, especially from the Gentile culture, read it and thought, yeah, this sort of gets it. And kept sharing the writings one to another because God seemed to be breathed into them. God seemed to have inspired them. And this, of course, becomes the New Testament connected to that Old Testament where I got chastised for reading some of it in the previous video. On one hand, I would not discourage someone from going into a monastery and devoted their life to prayer, nor would I discourage someone from a more Protestant vocation of family and work, or maybe a more Protestant vocation of just work without family. That's viable too. And I certainly I'm not skeptical about the fact that people who fully commit themselves to the path in the midst of suffering often become quite exceptional people, people that we can look up to, people that if a poll is taken around them, we'll call them a saint. That's true too. And so all of this looking around that we're doing, looking for different knowledge, different ways of knowing, different ways of being, it's all an important vocation. But beneath it all, and above it all, there is God. And God knows what he's doing. And we certainly live in relationship to him. There's a lot of stuff in Esther Meek's, that's apostrophe S, stuff that talks about transformation, and you can just sort of go through the different chapters of her book. One of the really cool things that I learned in the video with her today was that for her, writing books is like what video making is for me. I tried real hard to get her into the corner to as a little more active role. We'll see if that succeeds. Faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. And I think part of the reason the greatest of these is love is because you need to love to know. We wind up doing all sorts of knowing, but you need to love to know. Another one of the things that she said in the video of how they work, especially in this culture where we have some strong controls on knowing, prevent a lot of knowing in that way.
Yeah, I'd say that's epistemological. You know, it's expertise. You know,
Yes.
is kind of this anal. Well, I'm not going to tell you what my colleague used to describe it, but you know, it's just kind of this anal. You're condemned to get more and more and more focused, and
Right.
you're inherently threatened by any sort of synthetic whatever.
Right.
And actually, I think the beauty, one of the many myriads of beauties of Polanyi's subsidiary focal integration is it shows, and this is the flaw in modernist epistemology, is we all presume knowledge is focal, that you focus on it. But he said, no, for it to sing, you've got to put it at the subsidiary. So if you took experts, quote unquote, and put them as subsidiaries to the larger vision of whatever your university, or in your case, your corner of the internet, and you know, that sort of a thing. If you put the people at the subsidiary and together, you can invite this transformative vision. That's how you navigate forward. And then those transformations, those integrations, it kind of in reverse catch things up as parts in a whole. Right. So for Polanyi, it's always kind of this lurching backward, you know, break in of insight from beyond that then catches everything up in it. And that's the healing, I would use the word perichoretic dynamic of good knowing. And I argue that we all know that if we can ride a bike, if we can play football, if we can make an omelet, if we can garden, it's everywhere. You can't deny it. So I tend to start with people on bicycles and talk about that for a really long time,
Right.
you know,
or swimming.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of this procedural, you know, maybe that's a good place to end. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. We're in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping. Them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved. A total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect? Or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show. Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes, or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes, and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.